Hello and welcome to my latest build guide for last Epoch. This is going to be the Immovable object, the Forge Guard. And this is a Retaliation build that does its damage by getting other people to hit us. And I made this build because, for a few reasons. One was that I saw that Forge Guard was like the least played mastery of anything. On the arena ladders, it's like the highest was like 250 or lower for waves. And people have been talking in chat like reflect damage is worthless. There's no, like, just ignore it. There's no point to it. So I'm a bit of a contrarian, I guess. I wanted to prove that Forge Guard can do stuff, that reflect damage can be useful, and so I really stepped out to see how far can I take Forge Guard into the arena, into high corruption, and so forth. So why should you care? Well, it's worked out fairly well. You can see that I'm second on the one-player leaderboard, or ladder. Wave 1000 is the top. I ended at 998. That was due to a bug where my defensive skill, Rebuke, did not activate, and I died instantly. Even though I should have been able to complete Wave 1000. Am I bitter about it? No, not at all. Everything is just fine. But I say that because I want you to know that I think I have some idea what I'm talking about here in terms of competency of what Forge Guard can do. This build is very, very tanky, like 3,000 to 4,000 ward per second. That translates to like a couple 100,000 effective hit points per second. It can deal damage that scales with enemy damage, so your scaling is very easy. We can free up gear for other things. You get some of the laziest spire clears in the game, where you can actually clear spire monoliths without even moving. But on the other side, it is enemy dependent, so there are some enemies that are just really annoying, and in some cases in general, your clear times and boss times are not going to be as high as just a pure DPS build, at least in lower corruptions. This build is very squishy if it's not protected by the safety of Rebuke. I mean, not squishy, but it gives up a lot. And because we have to always be channeling Rebuke to be our tankiest version of ourselves, we do lose a lot of mobility. So if you should pick this build, it really comes down to, the reason I put those little teasers at the beginning was, if you enjoy running towards danger, if that looks like fun to you, if you want to run towards the big sentinel laser blasts, if you want to sit inside of Lagon's beams, if that appeals to you, if you like seeing the strongest attacks in the game come at you, and then those enemies just get knocked over and die as a result, then this is, I think, a good build for you. If you care about just optimal clear times and farming, this is not the right build for you. So let's get into the mechanics. The first thing I want to talk about is reflect damage percent versus damage reflected on hit. These are two different mechanics. So I'm using percent damage reflected. This means any damage that is taken by me or my minions is returned to the source. So that happens after any armor is applied, any resistances, things like that. The final damage number comes, and that gets returned to the enemy. This ignores any of the enemy's damage resistance, and with one minor exception, which I'll talk about later. And it also does return damage from damage over time abilities. On the other hand, something like this damage reflected to attackers, or this flat damage reflected bonus on Thorn Shell, those are only returned on hit. So you have to actually be hit. Damage over time does not do anything, and these only scale, well, the only way to get a percentage scale is to use Thorn Shell. Otherwise, this is always flat damage that gets returned. It doesn't matter how much damage is incoming, you just return that flat number back to the attacker, which is a viable low-level strategy, and druids can do it at a higher level. Waltzing Bear's build you might see on Last Epic Tools. This one over here, they are actually doing that actual Thorns damage reflected to attacker. Does not work on damage over time though. So just now that that's clear, the basic summary of how this works is we have three components that kind of work together in this build. The defensive core comes from Apostate's Sanctuary, and that is the line that we care about is the +6 ward per 1% uncapped physical resistance while channeling Rebuke. Uncapped physical resistance, I actually didn't understand what that meant when I started this build, but what it really means is our total sheet version before the 75% cap is applied. So my uncapped physical resistance is 537% right now. That means from Apostate's Sanctuary, I get 3,240-ish ward per second while channeling Rebuke. And Rebuke, as you might know, is an amazing damage-reducing spell. It reduces all damage by 80%, and that's a multiplier, so that's insane. That's like a whole another set of armor that you're wearing. It's very cool. It's amazing. Now to balance that out, the Sanctuary has this other thing that says current health and ward lost when you directly cast a spell. Rebuke is a spell, so what that means is we lose some health, we gain some ward, and then when we recast, we lose some health and gain some ward. So that gives us like upper and lower bounds to our ward, basically. That it refills over time, then it'll fall back to a lower value, and then it will refill again. And so, yeah, that makes our defensive core is just Rebuke and Apostate's Sanctuary. For our offensive, the first kind of tier of our offense, like I said, we're doing damage reflected. But we're not reflecting our own damage because we don't really want to take damage. We don't like taking damage. We're channeling Rebuke, right? So what we do is we use this minion damage reflected, and we use Ring of Shields, because Ring of Shields produces up to 8 minions at a time. And so that means that we have 8 times our total minion damage reflected. They also inherit from our any stats from our shields, so they get more damage reflected. And this gives us a way to deal large amounts of % damage reflected, especially against area attacks, and especially against area damage over time attacks, which is a very unique ability in Last Epic. What this works best for is dealing with any high damage area of effect abilities. This is our counter for those types of enemies. Most bosses deal high damage area of effect abilities, and as well as many of the most damaging lethal enemies in the game, like Wengari Spires, Ice Golems, Siege Golems, the Diamond Matrons, things like this that do just giant AoE things that are brutal and drain your health very quickly. Many of the Shade of Orbis attacks. So we are using those to our advantage to boost our own damage and return it. But that doesn't cover everything. because there are many little fodder enemies in this game that do almost no damage, and some even things that don't attack at all. So we have to have one more tier in our offense to kind of complete the picture and give us a counter for low damage enemies. And for that, we use Manifest Armor. And it's kind of, so this is still Retaliation build, but there's kind of this hidden thing in Manifest Armor that you can't see unless you look online. And Manifest Armor has this hidden attribute, which is it retaliates with a Fire Nova whenever it takes 200 damage. At low levels, this isn't going to happen that often, but once you get into moderate corruption or a climbing arena, this is going to go off of every single time the armor gets hit. And so it does 20 damage, and it is a hit. So what we do is we want to load up things on our manifested armor that apply on hit, and we use that for clearing the low health, low damage, but numerous enemies that appear in the game. And that's it, really. It's three. It's almost like a triangle that balances together, where we have our defense, our high damage counter, and our low damage counter. So that's the summary, and now I'm going to dive into each skill in depth, and we'll go through the mastery specializations and what kind of options you have. So first of all, let's start with Rebuke, because this is kind of our core. I'm going to start off right away and say that everything over here is bugged. Everything to the left is bugged. This Protective Legacy just doesn't work, and therefore Burst of Speed doesn't work, and therefore Solemn Vow doesn't work. So ignore this, never go for that, and we don't care about it. So because our shields are reflecting damage, think of damage as the biggest hit you can take, right? If you're taking infinite damage, what's going to determine how much damage those shields can actually return with reflect damage? One is the reflect damage percent. The other is how many hit points those shields have, because you can't reflect damage more than your hit points. So we care a lot about how many hit points our shields have, and we also care about healing those shields. Conveniently, Rebuke also offers a way to heal ourselves and our shields. So this is going to counteract the life loss that we have from the Apostate Sanctuary, and it's also going to keep our shields alive. So we fully invest in these three nodes. That gives us a base heal. It scales our heal based on our attunement, and it also gives us a 60% multiplier per second that we're channeling. So this also implies that you can really go two routes with Rebuke. Mana regen, we have to invest in it, and it's awesome anyway to be regenerating more mana. That's great. So you can either go this longer duration route, or you can go the more defensive route, which gives us extra bonuses to armor and or elemental damage taken. This is another multiplier on damage taken for elemental attacks, and elemental attacks are some of the most common high damage attacks in the game. But because of this accelerated healing, there's two reasons that I prefer Infinite Guardian. One is that we have this extra cooldown recovery speed from Mystic Aegis, and that adds a mana cost to Rebuke. So the lower our cooldown on Rebuke, the more often we're going to have to pay this mana cost. Also, the longer that we channel, the longer we're going to get accelerated healing bonuses for ourselves and our shields. And the less often that we recast Rebuke because it's a spell, the less often we're going to lose ward to Apostate Sanctuary. So it increases our overall ward to go this way. So it's more of a generalized way. Also, the armor percent is amazing in general, but not strictly necessary for us. So, and this regenerative shell is just a waste of 2 points, basically. Extra duration, these two work together to extend our duration almost 100%, which gets us to just under 4 seconds. So the goal here is to be under the total duration. So as long as your cooldown is less than the duration, we're in a great place. Everything else in this wing and this wing are damage based, either fire or void or both. So we don't really care about that. We do almost no damage on hit, and that's not the point of this build. So we ignore the rest, and that's Rebuke. Looking at Ring of Shields, so there's a few key points here. So remember that because our minions are reflecting damage, we want as many of them as possible, and we want them to have as much health as possible. To do that, we go up here and we get more shields. This is 3 more shields, and combined with this, that's 2 more shields. We start with 3 and we go up to 8. That's amazing. So that gives us, 8 times our reflect damage percent returned per cast of Ring of Shields. To get even more use out of them, we extend the duration and get a 100% health bonus. That health bonus combines with banding for another 100% health bonus. That's a total of 400. That is essentially a double and a double, so it's a 400% total increase to health because they are both multipliers. And this also gives us 100% extra duration, so that gives us the best chance of getting all of our health out of our shields. And the shields don't follow us. Actually, that's not a bad thing because it lets us set up kind of defensive fronts with our shields where enemies will have to go through multiple layers of shields to get to us, potentially. So actually, it's kind of supposed to be a drawback, but I prefer it that way. Adding duration, even better, because that also gets multiplied by the 100% duration bonus. 10% damage reflected is pretty insignificant, but we might as well take it. And then healing, each shield has a base healing amount. That's fantastic. You can also spec into having a base healing effectiveness, which is very good, but we already can give our shields base healing effectiveness through equipment and through our other skills, so this isn't essential. Other options, we don't want to reduce our shield health. We don't really care about slow retaliation or pushing. This is a bonus for ourselves. That would be nice, but it's not essential and it's not 100% uptime. Same for Iron Form. This is okay, but not really impactful. And these bonuses, again, are nice, but more important to have healing effectiveness, because ultimately we don't want to increase the resistances and armor of our shields too much prematurely. We kind of incur that penalty here, but that's going to reduce the rate of damage that our shields can return. Towards higher corruption, it's not going to matter. Like, our shields can still die very quickly to many attacks. So, but just something to keep in mind, especially at lower corruption or if you're leveling, that we don't really want to add resistances or armor unnecessarily, or block chance even, to our shields if we can avoid it. These are bonuses on shield death, which don't really matter to us because it's either this isn't how we're doing damage, and this heal is just for us. We don't care because we're using ward. Same over here. This is all fire damage bonuses. That's not how our shields are doing damage, and this is only when using warpath. So that's really what matters. I wouldn't increase this anymore. We really want our shields grouped up as much as possible. So Manifest Armor, this is one of the coolest skills, I think, in the game. Just so you know, so for health scaling, shields only have 5 health per attribute point, which is very low. The 4x multiplier for health is very important because of that. And all of our minions on Forge Guard do scale with both strength and attunement. Manifest armor has it's basically worth twice a shield, so it's like 2 shields worth of health. But this one, like I said, remember, it doesn't really do damage from. I mean, it does reflect damage, but that's not the key way it deals damage. The main point is to get it abilities on hit and use that Fire Nova Retaliation. The key nodes to look at are getting it a sword and getting it a shield, because the sword will. It says sword, but it's whatever weapon that we have equipped. That lets us really customize the manifested armor better, and the shield lets us get some healing effectiveness, and that combos well with our ring of shields as well. Along the way, there are a bunch of ways of extra nodes to modify your manifested armor. You can go with this fire damage, you can go slowing, you can go bleed or physical shredding. You can also add reflected damage. These all kind of suck. Blast Forge, for example, sounds really cool, but it just is a basic attack. It just turns its basic attack into this AoE spell, and it's still just doing 1 hit at a time. You can get 5-10 hits from Fire Nova in a row when your when your manifested armor is charging into a horde of enemies. Relying on their auto attacks is just, I think, not good. Plus, Blast Forge keeps the manifested armor at range, which makes it less likely that their Fire Nova will actually hit anybody. So this, really ignore it. Much better is, so redistributed steel, we have to get 3 points anyway. Also, it's amazing because it's a flat damage multiplier. Always a good thing to have. And Bulwark, a flat health multiplier, great, and helps cancel out a little bit of the health penalty from redistributed steel. This is health regenerated per second. Terrible. Don't invest in this ever, except for the 2 points to get to Bulwark. What's much more interesting about manifested armor are these 4 core nodes. So by default, manifested armor will get 100% of your armor, body armor, helmet, gloves, and boots stats. With these, you can get up to 340% of the gloves, boots, and helmet, and up to 260% of the body armor. That means you have a little walking manifested armor that essentially has 3.5 pairs of boots and gloves on, or helmets, or whatever. And it's very easy to abuse this with some unique items, especially if you get legendary versions of them. So, as you can see, gloves are going to be very important, but all 3 of these can be viable. All 4 of these can be viable, really. There's not a lot of unique armors that pair well with with dealing damage on hits, but the other 3 can all be great. Also, having a chance to taunt, I find that this isn't very necessary, but it can be useful in peeling off enemies that have focuses on attacking players. So 1 point in there is useful. These 3 are our core, and for the other 2 points, we really have several other options. You know what? I missed one thing that's very important. Ring of Shields is an instant cast spell. Instant cast means that it does not take a cast animation, and it doesn't take any cast time. That means that you can actually cast instant cast spells while you are channeling. So while I'm channeling Rebuke, I can cast Ring of Shields, and it keeps on going. So instant cast is very, very desirable for this build. And to that effect, we have a couple of options. First of all, Sigils of Hope. When we go over to the left here, it becomes instant cast. The rest of these don't really matter. I mean, increased damage is nice. The real use of Sigils of Hope, though, is for Invigorate. And as you can tell, I respec these all the time, so that's why I'm at 17 points right now. But the real use here is Invigorate. That gives us 30% per sigil of increased healing effectiveness for us, and most importantly, for our allies. This is a key way to add more healing effectiveness to our shields and our manifested armor. And this route up here takes us to extended duration and another maximum sigil. If I had more points, I would cap this out and then go for mana efficiency. It would be nice to pick up the 5th sigil, but it's not essential. And there's limits to how much it gets pretty mana intensive, especially with the with this instant cast penalty. So this is all kind of offensive, which we aren't using our sigils for. This is a nice bonus for healing, but it's really not effective and requires kind of investment in Divine Flare and maybe Well of Light, or of course Well of Light. But then if you do that, you get a big heal every essentially 1.5 casts of sigil, but you miss out on the healing effectiveness, and we have other sources of healing, namely Rebuke. So I skipped this part, and this is honestly really tempting to get this block chance per sigil, but then it's only for us, so that's unfortunate. So Volatile Reversal, I'm a little sad that I'm using this, to be honest, because it's like everyone uses Volatile Reversal, but we're not using it for health or mana regeneration. We are only using it for the time rifts. So this increases damage over time taken and just flat enemy damage taken. Those are really the only 2 nodes that we care about, and then avoid rift arrival on start and arrival on start, so departure and arrival. Let's use consistent words here, people. Other than that, we decrease the cooldown dramatically, and our reversal only cools down in 2.5 seconds. And that's it. It's just a little thing, but that actually can make our damage over time completely melt enemies. It's pretty effective. Unfortunately, even though it is instant cast, we cannot use it to while we're channeling. It kind of breaks us out of our Rebuke, and we actually are stuck, and we have to physically let go and restart the Rebuke. So not great, not ideal, but for monoliths, it can be really nice to add some faster clearing. We have a couple of other options besides Volatile Reversal and Sigils of Hope. We can look at, a common one is Shield Rush. The nice thing about Shield Rush is we don't have to specialize it. We can just use it whenever. The only benefits from specializing are these 2 points in reduced damage taken, and moderately, you get some mana efficiency, and you can increase the stun chance and the damage, which will only, but like we do so little damage, it's still pretty unlikely you're going to stun most things. So the only point of specializing really is to get this damage while rushing. This whole wing over here is all about the final hit damage, and this node returns us to the starting position, which that defeats the whole point of, for our use of Shield Rush, which is maneuverability. And then everything else is damage and damage. So one cool thing though about Shield Rush, so like I said, we don't have to specialize it, we can just use it. One fun thing about Shield Rush is that, so we're channeling, and now we're rushing. And I don't know if you saw that, but as soon as the rush ends, then we start channeling again, as long as we are holding down Rebuke. And we have a lot of bonuses while channeling, so it's kind of advantageous to continue channeling. So having a move skill that keeps channeling is not bad at all. I'll take it. If I need some movement. If I don't care about movement, so this is my preferred skill for damage right now. Oh, but you can also go to Forge Strike. Forge Strike will give us more minions, which is great, but it requires casting or physically attacking something, not casting, which is good. If I take Forge Strike, I usually go down to Eagle Strike so that it can be cast anywhere. And if I have just Forge Strike, I'll take this no cooldown node as well. That way, if you see like a kind of a swarm of enemies, you can just chain cast Forge Strike at them from a distance and hopefully get up to your maximum forged weapons. So then this mass production is important to get your chance to create forged weapons up. Otherwise, it's pretty low and disappointing. And this is important, well-forged weapons, because that will increase your duration and your maximum from 6 to 10. There are a couple other options. The arcane welding is cool because you do get a little boost of ward when summoning your weapons, which can be nice, especially since you're not channeling Rebuke. Reinforced armor is also okay because you get a quick armor boost by 100%. Decent. This is all damage, which we don't, from Forge Strike itself, which we don't care about. Similar over here. And we don't really need to stun things, so this is fine. Engines of War is fine. Extra area. But other than that, it's really about, the purpose here is to have even more bodies that are persistent and movable, which the shields typically are not. And they get all of our damage reflection. So if you are using Forge Strike, you might also consider using Multistrike because of this node right here, Heated Forge. So every time you hit someone with Multistrike, you get a stack of armament, which lasts for a couple of seconds. As you build up stacks of armament, you once you reach the cap, then you can do one Forge Strike and summon forged weapons equal to how many stacks of armament you had. So with Perfect Steel and Doctrine of the Anvil, you can get 4 max stacks of armament and summon 4 forged weapons at a time. This Multistrike can also be useful because you can add more flat armor and block effectiveness for each stack of armament. So it's nice. It's nice, and it's definitely, this is what I would do at low levels just to crank out forged weapons, is Multistrike plus Forge Strike. But eventually they get overshadowed because you can only have 12 forged weapons without adding gear, the set in particular. But with Ring of Shields, we can get 8 rings of 8 shields per cast, 8-second cooldown, and 32-second duration. So we're going to end up with 24 to 32 shields. And so adding 12 forged weapons just isn't worth breaking our Rebuke and risking getting hurt and murdered. One thing I do want to say about, I said that you couldn't move shields. That's not entirely true. Actually, with Shield Bash, if you take the Wall of Shields node, you can actually move your shields. They will form a line wherever you Shield Bash. So, and Shield Bash is actually pretty cool because it has a 2-second plus 75%. So it's really like a 3.75 second stun guaranteed, which is crazy, with a large area, and you can also get block percentage, block chance, and effectiveness. you can get hits blocked guaranteed, and as well as some slow debuff, or extra charges. Oh, don't get this, but extra charges. So it's definitely an interesting option, but again requires breaking our channeling to use. So it's kind of a situational thing. But if you're using Ring of Shields a lot during monoliths and feel like the manifest armor isn't enough to keep up damage, then yeah, I would try out Shield Bash and see if you like it. If you like pulling your shields around with you, and it can be interesting to kind of it makes it feel very tactical, like you're arranging pieces on the board to move your shields around. So it's kind of fun. Other than that, right now that's really it. You can look at Abyssal Echoes just because it has this healing option down here for even more healing. But it's a spell, so it drains your ward and your health, and you have to cast it a bunch. If you do try it, I would go into Shrieking Echoes to get the recasts, and then Heavenly Gift. Those are the core pieces. Yeah, and that's skills. We made it. Okay, great. So I'm going to talk about gear, but I want to talk, before I talk about gear, well, I have to talk about passives, and also let's talk about stat priorities. So number one priority is really going to be cooldown reduction, because that's going to get our Rebuke underneath the duration, the channeling duration, and it's going to make Ring of Shields usable as much as possible, which increases our overall, one of our overall damage mechanisms, tiers, wings, however you want to think about it. After that, physical resistance is our top priority to get the most out of our Apostate's Sanctuary. Then minion HP, just to add even more survivability, more damage potential out of all of our minions for that reflect damage percent. So because we're generating so much ward, we want ward retention. We're not an intelligence class, so the way that we get that is through Frostbite Shackles and freeze resistance. Cold resistance, excuse me. So just like Apostate Sanctuary, Frostbite Shackles gives us ward retention per uncapped cold resistance. So it's another uncapped value that we're looking for in our gear. But any source of ward retention is great. Then after that, I'd say reflect damage percent is important on our shields. You can also get it on the chest armor, but it will only affect your manifested armor. And then just look for attunement and strength, because those are going to be the two stats to. Well, attunement is most important because it will affect HP, but also the damage of our manifested armor and the healing rate of Rebuke and other heals that we do. So attunement first, and then strength, just for a little bit of extra plus armor. And it also adds minion base HP, so which is always good. If you're doing a more excuse me, sorry, water. If you're doing a more offensive build, you probably want to use Calamity to get extra damage over time on your Forge Guard. And in that case, you would want Ignite, Duration, and Fire damage. So that would be the next stat priority to look for. But before we get too far into gear, let's talk about our passives first. So we really don't care about vitality and hit points. Like, it's nice, but the more hit points you have, the more get lost to Apostate Sanctuary, the more we have to heal back. We're just going to be a ward class, and that's going to be our primary source of survivability. So here we start with Juggernaut for the strength bonus. We get extra armor and another defensive layer to reduce damage from nearby enemies. And you can kind of choose if you want Valiant Charge reduces the cooldown of Shield Rush and Volatile Reversal, because they are both movement skills. But you could also put it into Stalwart instead for the extra block effectiveness. Both are reasonable. So Forge Guard, if we look at our passives, we have extra physical resistance, fantastic for Apostate's Sanctuary, and we also have 3% increased armor for each hit we've taken in the last 10 seconds. When you're getting like really swarmed and armor really matters, this can be up to 50 to 100 stacks easily. That's 150 to 300% increased armor. That really makes increased armor less desirable overall, and flat armor much more useful to us. So that also means that strength isn't as useful because we can just take hits instead. And if we're not taking hits, then we're taking damage over time, and armor doesn't matter that much anyway. So that's kind of the way we think about armor as we go through the Forge Guard passives. When I look at this, I see 40% physical resistance. That's an extra 240 ward per second when I'm hit, and another 60% armor bonus. That's amazing. Pick up any block chances whenever you can, and we go down this Weapon Master tree. These points don't matter. These points don't matter at all, but we want this Anvil Stance to give us 25%, another 25% damage reduced layer. That's fantastic. Thorn Mail gives us base armor and also a bit of thorns. This is not damage percent, but this is the flat damage returned. That helps in low levels, but really we're just in it for the armor. And more and more flat armor. Just get all you can. This is whenever we block, we get more armor. Fantastic. I love it. Synergizes with all of our other reactivity as we get hit. Smelter's Might is cool because it applies to our minions, and it works on hit. So if you wanted to go all out offense, then yeah, take it. But 70% is not that exciting. Also, without a calamity and ignite percent, or duration, then it's a lot less exciting. Or bleed penetration, I suppose, would be fine too. Iron Attunement, we like attunement, and we like armor. Minion armor is acceptable, but it's really just a nice attunement boost for us. We don't love it, but there's not anything else we really need at this point. This is kind of a final point dump, so to give us, and having extra health, like I said, is fine. Like, it's not a bad thing. If you are using Forged Strike, you should have at least 1 point here, because it will give you 2 more maximum forged weapons. And this is a weird throwing direction, so if you're doing throwing, then you might want this. But I actually kind of want, if I had dodge ability rating, I actually would want to keep it, I think, because it kind of adds another defensive layer against hits. So, flat armor, great. Don't care about it, but we need it for Shield Crafter. This is really about the 150% health for minions is fantastic. It's a great source of minion health. And the 3% chance to cast Ring of Shields is just an added bonus. It's nice when it happens, but don't rely on it. So when we use potions, we get another armor bonus. That's great. More importantly, here's another source of physical resistance and a defensive layer for damage over time. That's great. And they get doubled when you take a potion. So this is a fantastic. Liquid Iron is fantastic. Go for it. These are damage we don't care about, and this is nice because it would add 3% cold resistance and therefore ward retention if we're using Frostbite Shackles, but that's not a huge amount per point, so it's kind of a toss-up between Might and Walls of Solarum. In the Paladin tree, we want to get to Sigils of Hope, so we're going to spend at least 15 points. Attunement and, most importantly, Cold Resistance. This is a fantastic node. More block chance. And 30 healing per second, essentially, if you're always being hit, is pretty reasonable. So, especially because if you hold Alt, you see that it scales with, it gets increased healing per point of attunement. So, another heal for our shields and our manifested armor, but we have to take 1 point into Holy Nova to actually get it to apply to them. You could consider Valor for healing effectiveness on ourselves, but not really worth it for our ward build. And we don't need spell damage. Everything else is kind of similar. Strength, don't care. And then finally for Void Knight, 10 points gets us both of these skills unlocked, which is nice. And most importantly is that 40% physical resistance again. So another 240 ward per second. Extra health is great, and we'll take the Void Resistance. Obviously, we are a little overcapped on Void Resistance, so not strictly necessary. So as you can see, like, we have Forge Guard has a ton of armor percent, a lot of flat armor. We really don't have to worry about armor as much when it comes to gearing. We can really focus on those stats that I said were our priorities. So with that, like I said, we already saw Apostate's Sanctuary. I mentioned the cold resistance from Frostbite Shackles. You don't need any uniques to play this build, but these two in particular make it much, much, much more effective. Without Apostate Sanctuary, you have to rely on healing and your health for the maximum hit you can take. It's just much less effective. It scales much lower than the 6 ward per second. And without Frostbite Shackles, our ward retention is going to be very low. And more importantly, almost, if you look, we have Frostbite Shackles gives 140% Frostbite on hit and 33% Frostbite duration. So with our Manifest Armor, multiplying those by essentially 3.4, that works out to over 100% Frostbite duration and over 400% chance to apply Frostbite per hit. So each time our Manifested Armor takes 200 damage, it's going to apply 4 stacks of Frostbite with over 100% increased duration. So this is the start of dealing a lot of damage with Manifested Armor. I mean, a lot for our standards. For our tanky turtle standards. To amplify that, we look at Stymied Fate. Now, the most important thing on the boot slot, is really the cooldown recovery speed. That comes first. But if you can get a legendary Stymied Fate with cooldown recovery, amazing. I got very lucky on this merge together. So, but even with the reason Stymied Fate is so great is that it has that 127% damage over time and 14% chance to apply Doom. Doom is a very high damage, void damage, damage over time affliction, but it only stacks 4 times. So it's not ridiculous, but again, with the multipliers that Manifest Armor can get, it really turns that damage over time and that chance to apply Doom into big benefits and more damage with our Frostbite Shackles. I wish that Snowdrift worked with Frostbite Shackles on Manifest Armor, because that 2% cold penetration with Frostbite per 10% freeze rate multiplier would be absurd, because it has 180 freeze rate multiplier that gets multiplied by 3.4, and then the 2% cold penetration is multiplied by 3.4, So it would be kind of insane, and that's probably why it doesn't work. This Snowdrift does not see the freeze rate multiplier when it's on manifested armor. So skip it, don't use it. But for the other slots, so you can see I'm using a set item. Set items you might believe are terrible, but they have some really unique modifiers on them that can make them useful to other builds. What's so cool about the Synathia's Dying Breath is that it double dips for our minions, all resistances. So we get all resistances, our minions get all resistances, and then the Forge Guard and Forged Weapons get another 25% all resistances because they're also using Synathia's Dying Breath effectively. So 50% resists for minions is actually kind of cool. Again, not at like low levels because it will reduce your reflected damage for the forged weapons, but for endgame, it's great. And we want resistances anyway because it's physical and cold resist, both great for us. For a helm, everything else, so we really like augury helms for the cooldown reduction. Physical resistance is fantastic. Cold. Ring of Shields is a nice option here because it adds more minion health, so I like to see that a lot. And then this is not a perfect helmet. I'd rather have attunement or fire damage. So like I said, if you want to go more offensive with your manifested armor, use Calamity, because this will add an ignite chance to its retaliation hit, its Fire Nova. And it also, if you have legendary potential, you can get in increased fire damage and increased ignite duration. That can then be multiplied by the manifested armor's specialization. I haven't been brave enough to combine these yet because I really would rather have a tier 6 or 7 ignite duration, I think, rather than tier 6 physical resistance is great, but if I'm going to make a damage calamity, I want it just to truly be a damage calamity. So, still waiting there. For body armor, same thing, physical and cold resistance, attunement on the prefixes, and then either strength or actually I'd probably take reflected damage because it's a bit higher on the body armor. It gets multiplied, so just to get a bit extra out of the manifested armor, I wouldn't mind damage reflected percent. Shield is one of the most important spots. You want a high block chance shield. I think so. I go back and forth, but I'm pretty sure that damage reflected percent is going to get the most total damage out of as the exalted prefix is going to get the most out of your shields, and then increased healing effectiveness, or potentially minion health. But at late game, you should have enough other sources of minion health that it's better to just give them increased healing effectiveness. And then the physical resistance is for you, and cold resistance if you can get it. The void is doing nothing for me right now. Belt, most important thing, is cooldown recovery. Everything else is second, but follows the same rules of general priority. So there's this question of, do you want to do critical strike avoidance or not with tank builds like this? I err on the side of caution and still go for it, but some people don't. It's really a personal choice. I think you can get by without it, but I would just I'd like to be able to take critical strike nodes, like minion or enemy buffs in monoliths. So I like to buff their critical strike chance significantly because it means they're doing more damage to the shields faster. So I like to have the extra layer of protection. I think right now, ideally, I would maybe go with 2 rings or a ring and a helmet, with critical strike avoidance if I could get by with it. But right now I'm using 1 ring plus a blessing. And other than that, same rules, just get the best opal ring you can get for that cooldown recovery. As you can see, I'm still using a rare over here, and it sucks. 1 attunement, 2 block chance. Garbage. For the relic, I mean, if you can get it, a Code of an Erased Sentinel is amazing because of the skill bonus, the armor bonus, and most importantly, armor mitigation applies to damage over time. I would love to be wearing one of these right now. But more important is to have the channeling, all resistances while channeling, and physical resist. That doubles up our physical resist and adds some cold resist as well. And then on the prefix side, having extra rebuke points is great, plus more armor is always nice. Let's see. Yeah, for idols, everything is the best reposting roll I can get. And then secondarily, if you can get vitality, that's good. On the ornates, and cold damage taken as physical is nice, just because physical doesn't have that reduced effectiveness. So, but otherwise, just reposting. And then for everything else, physical resistance, physical resistance. I don't know why I'm using necrotic there. Kind of surprised. I must have just been scared. I guess I was probably doing an arena run and was scared to not have capped necrotic. Otherwise, I would just use physical. If I had better resists here, I would do physical. Actually, that reminds me on the shield. All resistance is probably better than cold because your physical resistance gives you more ward per second than cold resistance does typically. As for what is possible, other gear just to think about, Firestarter's Torch with the Ignite chance on hit is a great weapon for a more offensive manifested armor. Thorns Shell is a nice item for leveling up because you can increase all of that flat Thorns damage that we deal, the flat damage reflected to attackers, and make short work of lower level enemies. Strands of Souls is a great unique to be targeting for legendary potential. If I could get a Strand of Souls with cooldown reduction, I would be very happy. As you can see, this one did not go as desired, but that's okay. I'd really rather have a higher ward retention percent anyway. That's a good, when you're looking at uniques, on the Sanctuary, we really want as low of a health and ward loss percentage as possible. On the Frostbite Shackles, we want as high of a Frostbite on hit and Frostbite duration as we can get. Stymied Fate, we want damage over time and Doom chance, but getting these with LP is not the easiest thing in the world. Strand of Souls, I'd like to have a much higher ward retention percent if I could, to make it really worthwhile. If you can get a Cradle of the Erased, it's kind of super cool because of that 2+2 block effectiveness per 1% total uncapped resistance. So that means we're already going for physical and cold uncapped resistance. That translates to a huge amount. Let's see. Yeah. 3,000 increased block effectiveness. That's crazy. But of course it's all random chance, so if you get a good one, go for it. Otherwise, it's fine to just use whatever base you can get. The base isn't that important if it's not a Cradle of the Erased. Take the best stats you can. Fun things to play with. Omnividence. Obviously, a Forge Guard weapon when you look at it, right? What's really cool is the damage reflected percentage, because this goes to our manifested armor and all of our forged weapons. This is actually the most damage reflected I think you can get for one individual minion. But just with the number of shields, it is outweighed, and you lose all the defensive bonuses, the block chance. Like it's just a fun thing for messing around, honestly. If you don't have an apostate sanctuary and want to just experiment more with reflected damage, then consider a death rattle, because it will increase the amount of damage your minions take. If you have a great Leoth Signet, the 75% elemental resistance while channeling is great. I mean, it's 75 cold resist, and we're always channeling. So this is a great base. Plus, it has the 10% elemental resistance. And honestly, I mean, 7.9 to 8.3, like, that's not the biggest loss in the world. And certainly, Rebuke is going to be able to take away a couple of our minor cooldown recovery speed bonuses. So if you can afford it, just something to consider. Thornslinger is another legendary base that's reasonable. The movement speed is great, as is the physical skills, which would give us an extra point for Rebuke, most importantly. And yeah, that's really items and what I'm using. Options, offensive versus defense. For the blessings, the most important one is probably armor while channeling and physical resistance. Get these two with as high of rolls as you can. For this ward per second, like, Legan's blessings suck. Like, let's just agree on that. It's fine. I probably will change it to the chance to gain ward when hit, because when we're being hit is when we're most vulnerable. Although the ward per second does help against damage over time, but it's so minor. It's, splitting hairs, kind of. Like I said, I have critical avoidance right now, but I ideally would like to trade this for all resistances instead. I have plus health right now, but I would like to trade this for dodge rating, so it's not a priority right now. But dodge rating probably helps me just a little bit more in terms of survivability. Other than that, you probably want to get a Grand Grip of the Lance and a Grand Winds of Fortune, and then spend all of your time in the Blood, Frost, and Death monolith to try and get the best possible Frostbite Shackles you can. You can use Runes of Ascendance to upgrade to fish for an Apostate Sanctuary, but you have to get these from the source, from a bot, because they are a boss drop. And let's see, for a loot filter, I'll put a link in chat, or in the description, excuse me. But I've been taking a more minimalistic approach to loot filters lately. I think this is a good starting point, where we basically always show tier 7 affixes because they're so good. They're just worth hoarding. And they're so rare. So if you find a tier 7, put it in a stash somewhere. We lower our idols down just to physical resistance and reposting. I have one catch-all rule for the affixes that really matter, like reflect damage and physical resistance, cold resistance, all resistances. And then I just have a single rule for the base items that are the non-unique slots. So getting an Argent Crest for that cold resistance, cooldown reduction, and the highest armor we can on body armor. Because you can always, if you're just starting out, you can always just craft these into something that's useful, or have a chance to craft them into something useful for you. And the idea would be that this is like a starting point, and then you kind of take affixes that are important and piece them out onto individual item rules if you want to be more and more selective gradually over time. Once you start having tier 6 or tier 7 exalteds, then you would restrict the affixes on that slot. But start here and get more fine grain over time. And then I have a rule just for all the core uniques that I care about. These feeder rules, just look for the affixes that I really would want on that unique with at least a tier 6. So, but I always look at all I mean, I don't hide Exalteds. It's always nice to look at them. But this just gives you a little heads up that you might have something interesting. Yeah, that's it for the build. That's the build. A couple of tips. So this can do all game content pretty safely. For Julra, the only thing to be aware of is that her area damage over time spell stacks up and doesn't go away. So when you see that little void patch beneath your feet, once I get 2 of those, or really just anytime she uses her time crush, I swap dimensions and move slightly so that I can start channeling Rebuke again, and then just wait for her to come to me and keep trying to kill her. Most bosses, you just sit in place, cast Ring of Shields underneath their AoE, and wait for them to die. If you don't know how to autocast, you actually... So I thought you needed a numpad, but you actually can do it with the virtual on-screen keyboard as well. All you do is in your settings, you change input keys, and then you assign the ability that you're using. So this build channels Rebuke all the time. You want to have a way to autocast Rebuke, because it's so bad if it drops, and it's very hard, honestly, on your body to just hold one button down for hours at a time, however long your play session is. So the way to use the numpad trick is you turn numlock on, assign an ability to Rebuke, a key to ability, and it should say keypad. Press a number, whatever number you want. It should say keypad like that. Then when you go back to the game, when numlock is on, if I press numlock 6, numpad 6, I'm channeling Rebuke. And then I just, while I'm channeling it, I just turn numlock off, and then it keeps casting by itself. So right now my hand is off the keyboard. I can walk around, but then as soon as it comes back up off cooldown, it starts channeling again. So very useful. When you're doing echoes, I just wanted to add one more thing. Say that look for, so our build does very well with adding damage to enemies, and it does much worse with adding health to enemies, because that just slows us down. So load up on damage, stay away from health. But this is actually very good, because the damaging extra damage nodes in echoes are actually some of the most rewarding in terms of rarity and experience. So I think it works very well for high-level corruption. And that's the build. I am going to add some demos now, just a quick monolith and boss run. And but thank you for sticking with me and checking these things out.